Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Loretta Cernowski. I'm a realtor with Remax Costa Del Mar here in Puerto Penasco, and I'm live with my co-host, Ricardo Borges. ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien. Hello, everyone. Good to be here again on our sixth show in a row.
And this one is, I'm guessing we'll have a lot of questions because I still have questions. And so I know this is going to be a very informative show. I told my clients that are currently have transactions on the table to make sure and watch this because it's something that's one of the most important parts of your real estate transaction, whether you're a seller or a buyer. Is that correct?
It is. Certainly is.
Okay, so first of all, in the real estate transaction, I write in the offer to purchase that this transaction is subject to the approval of the settlement statement by the buyer and the seller 5 days after they receive it. So, can you kind of tell us the timeline? So, say if I wrote an offer today, what would be the timeline for me being able to get a settlement statement, and what are the variables of us getting that settlement statement?
Yeah, typically it's going to take within the next, the very next day you are asked, you know, for the costs, but it would depend on a lot of variables because you have to, to knock on many doors to get that information handy. So assuming that you did have all the paperwork that you need to put together those numbers, mathematically and reasonable, you could say next day, but typically it'll take between 3 days and 5 days.
Okay.
Okay.
And when you say the documents, can you give us some examples of documents? And these documents that the seller needs to provide, or the buyer, and or both?
Sellers, uh, mainly because with the title of the seller, you're going to be able to tell what is the code for the property taxes, so you can have that ability to go to the city and require if there is any debt of, or if the property taxes have been duly paid. Um, Most importantly, that is going to be your key element document along with another document that I'm going to talk in a minute. But the escritura or the title, it's key element for you to assess the capital gains, or to have your notario assessing the capital gains number if there were any.
Okay. Well, let's dive right in. Okay. So we're going to go back to a few slides here. So this is, you can't see this, everyone, right now, but this is just we're going to go through this line by line. So we'll just start with the very first part, which comes from your office. We got the property, the sales price, earnest money, what type of contract is, closing date, tax ID number, and the payment method. Obviously, the commission is pretty standard, although perhaps you could explain to everyone that doesn't know, it's 6% plus 8% IVA. What does IVA mean?
In Spanish, that stands for Impuesto al Valor Agregado,
Okay.
also known as the sales tax.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 8% here in this area, and all area of the Mexican border, it would be 8% for many of the entities and individuals. There may be other entities or individuals that are recorded with the Mexican IRS or registered with the Mexican IRS under a different tax percentage, which is 16%, but typically it's 8%.
And,
So you would have to add that 8% to the 6%.
and is that a city tax, state tax, federal tax?
This is a federal tax. IVA, or a sales tax, is a federal tax. and it's assessed nationwide, evidently.
Okay.
Now, if you go outside the border, then it would go 16%.
Outside the border of the state?
Outside of the border in Mexico,
Okay. Oh, gotcha.
any city that it's adjacent to the border would be under 8%. Almost all of them. But
Okay.
so basically, what we do here is we assess this 6% to the agreed purchase price. Okay, and to the result of that, we assess the 8%. It is
Okay.
not 6 and then 8. So it's 6% assessed to the purchase price, then you can get the commission number. And then
Okay.
you assess the 8% to the commission number.
Okay, great. So then we have your fees, the law office of Ricardo Borges, legal fees, and coordination. Is there anything that we need to add? It's pretty straightforward.
It is, and it'll vary depending on how many things my office or any other office are asked to do. It depends again on the transaction, but it's pretty standard. It varies from uh, I don't know, $750, probably to I don't remember how much is the higher amount I have assessed. But again, it'll always the scope of the things we have to do. But it typically varies from average 1,000 to $2,000, somewhere there.
And are your hours, are they based on like, or is it billable hours or is it just on the tap?
No, this is a fixed rate, and it will cover the whole work that the office performs to get the transaction completed.
Okay. In the
Uh,
city of Puerto Penasco, are all closing coordinators attorneys?
no, no, not all of them. You know, Technically, anybody understanding the vowels and the intricacies of the system and the real estate industry could do it. Um, Evidently, if there is an attorney involved, either the attorney doing the coordination or other people being assessed or advised, I'm sorry, by an attorney, it's a plus for the clients, both seller and buyer.
Um, what is the advantage of someone that's choosing a closing coordinator like yourself that's an attorney versus not an attorney?
If you understand the law and especially the real estate law, you are more suited to uh, identify problems that comes either in the title that you are being handed to transfer either ownership or any other rights to the potential buyer. You can also identify better fiscal issues, issues with the public registry or at the city level, but most importantly, the transaction itself. You're an attorney is more suited, again, technically speaking, to identify whether a contract is correctly done or if it's missing something important.
Do you know what we call that in the United States and Canada? CYA?
What's that for?
Cover your.
Oh, well, makes sense. Pretty much. Again, I'm not saying only attorneys can do this, but I think it's safer. Uh,
Of course. It's the one of the biggest investments of your life.
certainly is, certainly is.
And
If I wanted to again, if I wanted to invest either in Canada or in the United States, I'd be make, I would make sure
yeah.
that I hire the services of an attorney. And if I happen to have any tax exposure, I would definitely want to hear from a fiscalist out there.
Of course. Okay, let's move forward to the next slide. So, number 3, we have costs associated with the bank trust, acceptance fee, admin fee, national registry for foreign investment, and back fees or prorations. So, can you speak to those?
Yeah, this this box here may change from bank to bank. Okay, in this particular case, I believe we were working on an assignment of trust rights, which means that the bank trust was already organized, back in whatever day. Okay, so what we are reporting here is the numbers or the fees or the fees that this particular bank is assessing to accept that a new person or entity is taking over where the seller or the current beneficiary is. Okay, that's why it's an assignment of rights. So the bank is assessing that much money, $464, to accept that. It's a one-time fee. Then the administration fee, which is an annual assessment by the trustee that continues all along the life of the bank trust.
And that's basically your annual, like your renewal fee, correct?
It's an annual fee. I've never heard about renewal, but I understand what you're saying. Every year they're going to assess that money because the bank is managing or administering the trust for you. Okay, but that's typical. In fact, I've never seen any transaction where a bank is not assessing that. It's how they make their money, plus those accepting one-time acceptance fees. Um, right, and then the National Register for Foreign Investment is a specific registry like the public registry, but this is meant for the recordations of transactions in which foreigners are investing in this country. So that the trustees are obliged to report every time there is an assignment of rights or they organize a bank trust. They're going to record and to inform the government of Mexico through this registry. Okay, and of course, in some cases, there are back fees owed by the current seller. Um, and if there aren't, well, we can use also that row for prorations of other things.
So would that be like that they hadn't paid their?
Right. They got in arrears of paying, let's say 2, 3, 4 years, and the bank, believe me, the bank won't authorize to move forward if those back fees are not paid.
So question, if you know the person hasn't paid their bank trust fees, how long could they go not paying their bank trust fees until the bank just says, I mean, is there a point where they could say you no longer have the beneficiary rights to this property?
Uh, Technically, it'll depend on the policy of the bank. Okay, 3 years, 4 years, but in all my experience of 20 plus years in this industry, I've never seen a bank going after a debtor. It probably will cost more money, in attorney fees and that kind of things, than the money they are to recover. It would have to be a gigantic amount of money for the bank to be interested in seeking legal advice and actually going ballistic.
Okay, but those
I'm not trying to encourage anybody to not
yeah,
pay. I
right.
just don't want anybody to be, stressed out. Oh, I'm going to lose my property.
Yeah,
Highly likely not.
but those back fees have to be paid in order to sell the property.
Yes, and it's of the essence that whoever is coordinating the closing reflects that the bank is saying there's an amount owed on that end.
Okay.
Okay, what we don't want as coordinators is to uh, close on a transaction and immediately after or later after say, oh, you know what, I'm so sorry, we came up short on whatever item, so we need more money.
Of course.
It shouldn't happen.
Okay. Let's talk about everyone's favorite subject in every country, taxes. state taxes, property taxes, and 2% transfer tax.
Yeah. So this box here is as well super important. Uh, Again, as coordinators, we have to make sure to present both buyer and seller what exactly are all and every cost involved in the transaction. Okay. Of course, property taxes are due every year, and most of the people decide to go ahead and pay yearly. If they pay January, for instance, let's say we are January 2023 now. So the city would offer you 20% discount if you pay the whole year in advance. Okay, because you should be paying uh, those property taxes in 2023 every quarter. But if you go ahead and pay the year, ahead of time, you get that discount.
And does
If you
do it
decide to,
all?
huh?
Well, how do you get notified of your taxes?
Uh, there, there is an address recorded with the city, but I suggest all our audience to not expect a bill before due date. Take notes. You have to know that you have to pay every year. If you want to pay quarterly, that's fine. Suggestion is, of course, pay one time in January so you can get a 20% discount and you forget about the problem. Okay. If you don't pay every quarter, then the city is going to start assessing some late penalties.
Okay.
Okay. So it is not untypical that when we're presented the numbers, we see that there are owed taxes 2021, 2022, 2020. In other cases, horror stories about that. Okay. So you have to make sure that you present the whole amount that is owed because the city is going to pose a huge obstacle for the notary to move forward when the transaction is formalized. The city is not going to authorize the
Sale.
escritura to move forward, and it's going to be a huge block.
Okay.
Okay, so we also can either represent that there's a credit for the seller, um, assuming that the seller did pay the the taxes, ahead of time. So whatever money is not used, it's going to be credit to the seller, depending when the property gets sold. If it was paid back in January and the transaction takes place in March, well, the seller, of course, is going to be reimbursed with March, April, May, so on and so forth till December. So he gets a credit. And if it's not paid, then it will be prorated. Whatever money is owed until today by the seller is paid by the seller, and from tomorrow on or to today on by the buyer.
Okay.
And the 2% transfer tax, that's also a very important aspect to consider and to take care of. By law, the city is allowed and entitled to assess 2% as a transfer tax. And that 2% is going to be assessed out of the highest between the purchase price, the assessed city value, or the appraisal, the commercial appraisal. Whatever is higher between those three, that's the basis for the 2%.
Okay.
Okay, so if you are um, working on a transaction of $200,000, so $200,000 times 2%, so it's $4,000 worth of transfer tax.
Okay.
Okay, and that transfer tax is always assessed to the buyer because it's a usage here in town. By law, according to the Civil Code of the State of Sonora, closing costs are to be divided 50-50. unless otherwise agreed. So typically, given the usage in town is buyer pays for pretty much all of those taxes except capital gains. Well, that's how it goes here in town. But
Sure.
you could tell sometimes, that both parties say, oh, no problem, we're going to pay 50-50. And you get to see in the column of both, 300, 3,150 on the seller and 3,150 on the buyers. Okay. We represent this taking into consideration the data and the instructions we receive from the offer and the accepted offer.
Okay. Of course. Is the 2% transfer tax, is that in every city in Mexico?
Yes, it is. Some cities call it different, but it's pretty much that the transfer tax, transfer of property or ownership. That's what it refers to.
What
Uh,
are the other names for it in other cities?
uh, in Mexico City, for instance, it's called ISAI, ISAI. I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's a tax for acquisition.
Okay.
Okay, and I believe some other states may have a higher value instead of 2%, probably 3%. Not sure, but I believe there are some.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to valuation, commercial appraisal, and assessed city value.
Yeah. So the city is obliged to propose and to not propose to provide a valuation for the property's subject matter transaction. Uh, Yet we also have to have by law the valuation of that property by a commercial appraiser. Okay, and that's why we use both commercial appraisal, I'm sorry, and the assessed city value. Because again, we need to know out of those two which is higher. In the past, meaning before 2023, we didn't even look to the assessed value because typically that number was going to be way lower than the appraised value. Yet now in 2023, that when the city decided to increase the taxes and the value of the properties, now it's important for everybody to pay attention to that value as well.
So in the United States and Canada, the buyer's lender would order an appraisal. So how does it work in Mexico in the real estate transaction?
That's the same thing. If a lender is involved, the lender wants to make sure where the money is going to buy what, and they want to make sure that they have an appraised value because it will tell them how much money out of the purchase price they're going to end up lending.
But what if it's seller financing or cash?
Doesn't matter. Well, if there is no lender involved, the value, the appraised value is important because the notary is going to need that information for the tax purposes calculation.
So if it's seller financing or cash, who orders the appraisal?
Say that again.
If it's seller financing or cash deal, who orders the appraisal?
You're going to need that for the city and for the notary public. The notary public is going to assess the taxes in many of the cases, at least in town,
Do you
when a
order?
Mexican entity is not selling. But
Who,
that
who
document
calls
is
the appraisal though? Who calls the appraiser to appraise it? Where does that come from?
typically the coordinator.
Okay.
Typically, the notario is not going to say, "Oh, I don't like this appraiser." No, but the notary is going to need the appraisal to understand what's the value on the lot, what's the value on the construction, and several other data that they need in order to assess the capital gains.
How many appraisers are there in Puerto Penasco?
At least that I know of, four.
Okay.
It's a good community, and yeah, you know, it depends who the coordinator feels more comfortable to work with.
Sure.
Um, that's it. There are a number of requirements for them to be able to be, appraisers in town.
Sure.
That's what we have to make sure, it exists. Once they meet that criteria, you can use whoever you want.
Okay. Okay. Let's go to public registry certificate of liens, public registry's title recordation.
Okay. The certificate of liens or certificate of no liens will tell especially the buyer, that the property they are buying is free and clear of any clouds or encumbrances. Okay, so that is very important document to get. That's why is required in the statement. You want to have that document handy to make sure that when the buyer acquired that property, there was no problem whatsoever. And there's another row there about the recordation of the title, which is one of the most expensive, or not necessarily the most expensive, but it's always expensive. When the title is ready, authorized by the notary and by the city, then the last step of the process is to record that document in the public registry. So it is recorded from that moment on that the new, in this case, it's again, it was an assignment of rights. So the new beneficiaries are going to be reflected publicly. So that means that anybody in the world, they're just going to the public registry, can tell who actually owns the property, or not the property, but in this case, the beneficiary rights of the trust.
Okay.
That is very important. Public registry is key in every transaction.
Of course.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about that on different shows, but the public registry, I will have to remark that always. It's key element in the process of buying and selling property in Mexico.
I think that's probably a good episode for us to have just on the public registry.
Yeah, definitely it is.
It's confusing to us. And just like this, confusing is the notary public because we are not familiar with that.
Right. I mean, it shouldn't be that confusing. Notary public is going to assess, fees for his or her services. Um, this is based on there is a law in the state of Sonora that tells what and how they're going to assess. The notarios are responsible for many, many, many sort of transactions in Mexico. So there is a law in which every transaction is explained how to assess their fees. But once they set that up, it'll be reflected, and it's typically paid by the buyer because seller is just about to get out of the equation. So the new document that is produced by the notario is going to reflect who the new buyer is. So that's pretty much why the buyer pays it. Then again, I've seen several times both saying, okay, we're going to pay 50-50. That's real no-brainer. It's really not much of a problem. Where there's a lot of confusion and fuss about is capital gains taxes.
Of course.
As you can tell here, it's actually highlighted in yellow because the first calculation ended up with $25,000. There's a number of reasons for that number to be that high. And we're also going to talk about that in further shows. It has to do with the ability of seller to prove the purchase price they paid or their basis for capital gains. Okay, or sometimes uh, the profit is so big that of course the taxes is big as well. And unfortunately, also, and this is very common, it has been very common for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years or more, is the exchange rate, because taxes in Mexico are calculated in pesos. So if someone bought property back in 2010 where the exchange rate was probably 10 to 1, so it's just math. They bought they bought a property for $500,000 times 10, it's 5 million pesos. And now they're selling property for $500,000. Say that the exchange rate is 20 to 1, so it's 10 million pesos. So 20 million, I'm sorry, 10 million pesos versus 5 million pesos. For the Mexican IRS, there is a fiscal profit of 5 million pesos.
Yeah, even though in US dollars they're losing.
Exactly. You ended up having the same $500,000 you paid for.
Yeah,
So,
it's very confusing to most people, but
yeah, so that on those cases, it's also very important to have the ability to explain that. And of course, there are legal ways to deduct, like in the United States or the majority of the countries, deduct from or write off from the capital gains number investments and money that you have put into the properties, like upgrades, meaning you added a bathroom or another uh, room or another story to the building. That investment goes against the taxes. So it's very complicated. It's not easy to come up with taxes. It's even harder to offset them legally. So
and we'll
yeah,
definitely have a
that's
whole show
where
on
it gets
capital
confusing.
gains.
Say that again.
We'll definitely have a whole show on capital gains.
Yes, and I would say several, because we
Okay,
wouldn't cover probably what would like our audience to understand in one show.
of course. And what about escrow fees?
The escrow fees. This statement that we picked for the show is an old one. What we wanted the audience to understand is what kind of um, items we're going to consider. But the escrow fees are standard. They are assessed in brackets. So from one to say $500,000, I believe right now it's $800, and then from 500,000 one to a million, it's a little bit more, and so and so. But typically, you're gonna get to see $800 now. Back then, 696. This is very simple. The escrow company is going to assess that fee for the services they provide, as escrow in the transaction.
Okay.
It's a flat fee.
And that really makes people feel comfortable that the money goes into escrow.
It does, and believe it or not, that's very common up in Canada, in the states. It's
Yes,
not. It's not in Mexico though. It's super common in Puerto Peñasco because the industry here pretty much accommodated to the usage of people doing transactions up in the states and Canada. For their better understanding and comfortness. But if you go outside Puerto Peñasco, many people are not going to have an idea what an escrow is.
sure. Makes sense. HOA.
Okay, in this particular case, the property subject matter of the transaction was part of a condominium regime. Okay, so that particular resort or area does have already fees set up for a given year. So coordinators are going to call and connect with the HOA people and make them understand that some property is being subject to transaction. So they're going to provide, with the permission of the seller, the information that is connected to a particular condominium. Okay, so whatever money they tell you, it's all you reflect that. It may well be that the seller, does not reconcile with that number. Then you have to go back to the HOA and you know ask what the problem is. Typically, it's not a problem. In this case, it went to the buyer's column because that's how they are arranged in this transaction, that number to be paid. But typically, it's going to go to the seller. And again, like property taxes, if the seller paid the HOA already, early in the year, is going to get a credit. And if there is no payment, then it's going to be prorated. And of course, if there are back fees, those are going to be assessed to the seller. And then again, if the parties, for whatever reason, they agree to be paid by the buyer, whatever they tell us is how we're going to reflect it. But they have to be paid because it's extremely important. Then again, we have to prepare all this for the moment we get before the notary public. The notary public is not going to authorize the instrument, the escritura or the title, if they don't have a letter from the HOA saying that there is no debt on that end.
Okay.
How that important is.
Okay.
And in this box, pretty much what we want to make people understand is how the monies, once have been collected by the escrow, are going to be dispersed. Okay, and the seller and the buyer are going to authorize this disbursement, and that's exactly what the escrow is going to be instructed to do based on this box exactly. And then the notes, whatever the coordinator believes someone needs to understand, this is meant for whoever is the recipient of the note to call you to talk about that. At the end, all buyer and seller need to understand each one of these notes, and that's our job, to make them understand that there may be, like this one in note 3, depending on the appraiser's statement with regard to the upgrades made to the property, those $25,000 could go lower. So they need to understand that we could work with the appraiser on that end, but given that we only had 5 days to present the numbers, we may not have all the information handy to get the tax process. But with the due information, the seller is going to end up telling you, well, we did make some upgrades. We put again another bathroom or another bedroom to the property, and we invested, $25,000. So we make sure that the appraiser reflects that investment in the appraisal, because that is going to be used by the notary public to offset taxes.
Of course. And this might be the first settlement statement, but many times we've had adjustments to make 2 or 3 times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Evidently, especially once they read the notes, they get to understand better these numbers. So it is typical that coordinators end up adjusting number of times.
Well, that was very thorough. Even I learned a lot. So we didn't have any questions because I think it's more people are just really wanted to really pay attention to what you were saying. And of course, if anyone wants the recording, we'll definitely send it out for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you again, Ricardo. Next week, we haven't 100% confirmed, but 99% we're going to have the director of the airport in the international airport in Puerto Penasco as our guest. and we're going to be talking about the current flights and what's coming down the pipeline for airways in Rocky Point, which is, of course, very exciting.
It's very interesting. Yep. Can't wait.
So everybody stay cool. I understand that there's a bit of a aftermath of Hurricane Hillary coming our way. So just make sure you know there's going to be probably a bunch of rain and wind. So take your stuff off the patio. Make sure you got lots of food in your fridge. Stay dry and stay cool.
Very well. Okay.
Okay, have a great night.
You too. Bye bye.